Okay, we're live.
All right. Um, so I believe we're ready. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Peace, Economics, and Industrial Reconversion, a Recovery Plan for the World. Thank you to all around the world for joining us. And if this is the first event you're tuning into for the Economy of Francesco, we welcome you to the event overall as well, and look forward to imagining with you a new world. We have a wonderful set of speakers lined up for you today, but first I hope you'll allow me to briefly introduce myself and the webinar. My name is Melinda Davis. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. in the US, and I serve as the co-coordinator for the Security Task Force of the Vatican's COVID-19 Commission. In the Economy of Francesco, I participate in the Business and Peace Village, as all here today, in which I co-lead a subgroup on nuclear disarmament and military spending. It's an honor to be here today. Today, we'll discuss the intersection of peace and economics, two seemingly unrelated topics, but both of which are essential for a well-functioning society. Peace, as understood in a truly holistic manner, is not only the absence of war, but is the presence of true justice, and requires that all human systems be ordered towards the dignity and development of every human person. Unfortunately, today, like many of our world systems, the global economic and financial systems are not at the service of the people, but rather put people at the service of the system, which can seriously undermine their ability to achieve their fullest potential and rob them of their dignity. This has never been more clear than during the pandemic. As Pope Francis has written in Fratelli Tutti, the fragility of world systems in the face of the pandemic has demonstrated that not everything can be resolved by market freedom. It is imperative to have a proactive economic policy directed at promoting an economy that favors productive diversity and business creativity and makes it possible for jobs to be created and not cut. Today, as part of the Economy of Francesco, in which we are dreaming together about the structures of our new world, we'll hear from experts in the field who work at the intersection of peace and economics regarding how to move towards conversion of heart, society, and world. I'll turn it over first to Bernat Solares to introduce our first speaker. Bernat.
Thank you, Melinda. We are very happy to be here with you. And as Melinda said, we have the great opportunity to have three experts on the field. As Melinda said, I'm Bernat Solares. I'm villager of this Business and Peace village. And let me just introduce you our first speaker, Juan Camilo Cárdenas. He's professor of economics at the Universidad de los Andes, Colombia. He's also been a faculty at Javeriana University in Colombia as well. He holds a PhD in research economics from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and did his postdoctorate at the workshop in political theory and policy analysis, Indiana University, under the mentorship of Eleanor Ostrom. That's important for us. In his research, Juan Camilo Cardenas uses economic experiments from the lab and the field, surveys and participatory tools to understand the human processes for building just, sustainable, and efficient collective institutions, in particular for managing the natural environments of society through a behavioral perspective. And before giving the floor to our first speaker, let me give you a remark from one of our villagers, Agnese Boscolo, and she is quite concerned with the current obsession with GDP growth and the correlative consumerism, because she says and thinks that this might be the reason behind the lack of peace, actually. So she is asking you, Professor Cardenas, which alternative model we have, how we can implement it. This is from top-bottom actions or bottom-top actions, like changing our collective mindset. A good remark, I think, to just start our session. So the floor is yours, Professor Cárdenas, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Belinda, for starting the session. It's a pleasure to be here with two other remarkable people, Raul and Susi. It's good to share this floor with you and with this group and such an important and relevant event. I think the question is quite relevant because what I will try to do in my remarks is to let you go through the idea of the connections between peace, nature, and the common good. And this will respond to that question in the sense that we need to make a major shift in how the economic system is going to work and what goals is going to pursue. And in that sense, let me start with one quote in which in Laudato Si, citing a previous pastoral letter back in 1987, read quite clearly what I'm going to try to connect today. Peace, justice, and the preservation of creation are three absolutely interconnected themes which cannot be separated and treated individually without once again falling into the reductionism. And this will bring the idea of how rethinking the economic model in which peace, justice, and nature are all combined and how each of them will require the other two to create a social contract that is better for the long term in terms of well-being and the well-being of the planet. So I will walk you through the 7 or 8 points that I'm going to communicate in this presentation to get to that point and eventually be able to respond to our question that started this in the village. First of all, I want you to think or rethink the idea of peace and understand peace as tranquility and not just as security. And that will be key to understand the problem of peace as a common good. And in that sense, I'm going to connect the idea of peace as tranquility as a concept that was developed precisely by Elinor Ostrom and her husband, Vincent Ostrom, on what they call universal good, not just a common good. And I will make that precision in a minute. This idea of universal good has to do with the idea that the benefits that one person receives from consumption of or satisfaction from that good is increasing as more people around them enjoy or benefit from that good. That's different from other types of good. And I'm going to bring the idea that peace is such it's a great example for what one would call a universal good. Secondly, peace, as many other global scale challenges like migration and climate change, are collective action problems, but of planetary scale. And I will communicate this idea in the sense that we have learned a lot about collective action, a lot about cooperation, but at very small scale levels. Now we need to scale this up to the global planetary levels, and that will bring challenges. And for that, communicate the idea that peace requires a different social contract. It's a better social contract with nature and in the economy with each other. And that social contract, using nature as a vehicle for peace and as a vehicle for prosperity and justice, is going to be key in that triangle of peace, justice, and preservation of nature. So this will eventually, in my argument, require each other. These three elements will require each other to construct what we want to build as a better society. And let me bring this down to earth, literally, with an anecdote that I heard from Jane Goodall when she came to Colombia many years ago. And she told us this story in a conference in our University of Los Andes. She was telling us about this sacred hill, but that was deforested, clear cut. And there was a group of kids in the Democratic Republic of Congo who wanted to reforest this hill. And they had the idea to bring the tools and planting trees there. And because of the conflict, a local militia group was very reluctant to authorize this. And they finally let the kids go to the hill, and they were accompanied by a group of soldiers from this militia. And a little girl was frustrated because the soil was very hard to get into the soil to plant the tree that she wanted to plant. And a soldier was standing next to the girl with his rifle, and he ended up putting aside his rifle so that he could get his hand into helping this kid. And in a few moments, in a few minutes, Jane Goodall told us, all the soldiers put their weapons aside and started helping the kids. And I think that's an image of what I'm trying to communicate on how nature is a vehicle for peace and a vehicle for transformation of what we're trying to say. This idea of peace as a universal good came initially from a seminar by Vincent and Elinor Ostrom in 1999, while I was spending there my postdoctoral year. And in their seminar, they were communicating this idea of a universal good, different from public goods or common goods or private goods. And it intrigued me. And unfortunately, they never wrote this more formally of what they meant. But the idea was to differentiate from private goods that we are well aware, in which only my well-being increases if I consume this, or public goods, which is my consumption doesn't bother or affects the consumption of others of that public good, or common pool resources or common pool goods, where my consumption reduces the availability for others, but I can exclude others. In the case of universal goods, and this was the core idea that I want to bring here for peace, is that my well-being increases when others around me are enjoying the same good. And in this case, I'm saying this for peace. The more they benefit, the more utility I derive from my own enjoyment. So this is an element of communality, of collective action, in which enjoyment of each person increases with the enjoyment of others around them. And that's different from private or public or common goods. And peace is such. But this idea of peace as tranquility, not just peace as security. So I enjoy more benefits of this idea of peace as tranquility if more around me are being peaceful. If I secure myself, but others around me are not secure, that's not peace as tranquility. That's just security for me. And in a sense, peace as security is regressive, because then those with the means will provide security for themselves, but they will eventually even harm others around them just by providing that security. And I am coming from a country, Colombia, who has suffered a violent conflict that has brought precisely this: illegal markets for private security, paramilitary groups, the use of weapons for the sake of protecting some, harming others. That's not the idea of peace as tranquility as a universal good that I'm trying to bring here. This is next connected with the idea of peace with nature. And I am underscoring with, because of two reasons. Nature has been a victim of violence historically. Violence and political conflicts have created harm into nature of incredible amounts. Deforestation, cutting forests for illicit crops that have created and fueled the violence. Devastation because of the use of weapons. And Raul and Susi will be good testimonies of the research and their work and their activism into these kind of things. But also the idea of thinking of nature as a vehicle for peace. And in that, I want to bring the research quickly of a young scholar, Gregory Bradman, who has been working on measuring and understanding why nature changed the affective states of humans. And in one of his original works a few years ago, he started to think of how humans are affected in their affective states because of their contact with nature. And the research is remarkable, it's incredibly fascinating. They are collecting a lot of evidence from psychology, neurology, neural sciences, anthropology, psychology, to understand this idea that contact with nature can communicate changes of the affective states of humans. And they have different theories of why this might be the case. But it's even more fascinating what they do in terms of experiments. In one of these experiments, they brought 70 adults who participated voluntarily in a study, And they invited these people to have walks in different places. And they assessed key cognitive and emotional states that are very important for how people relate to each other: anxiety, rumination, negative affect, and also positive affect. And in this study, they randomly assigned these people to have a walk in an urban setting and to have a walk through nature in a natural park. And the results were quite striking on how the mental states in terms of anxiety, rumination, or affect were transformed just by these short walks into nature if compared to the control group, which is in an urban setting. This is another example in which they did the similar. You can see the pictures of the walk through nature or the city, and then they took images in the brain through MFRI, and they found how the activity in the brain that is associated with rumination, which is key in violence studies. People that have suffered violence have a lot more of rumination, whereas people that have better mental states, the rumination is shorter in time. And also the activation in the brain that it's related to affect. This is just to say, and I am quoting here another piece from Laudato Si, that this idea of inner peace is key to understand the relationship with nature. It says inner peace is closely related to care for ecology and for the common good, because it lived out authentically. It is reflected in a balanced lifestyle together with a capacity for wonder, which takes us to a deeper understanding of life. This is that balance between fairness, justice, nature, and peace. I don't have to tell you what Colombia has been suffering through all these decades, but I wanted to show you this map as an example, which is the overlap between the regions that have had the most political and violent conflict with the regions that have the highest wealth of biodiversity and cultural diversity in the country. And these places that you can see in the black areas, which are the municipalities, the regions where the peace process concentrated most of the combatants to start a re-establishment of a new order of inclusion and the ceasefire among the parties, coincided also with regions that are very rich in biodiversity and also that are occupied by indigenous groups and Afro-descendants groups. This is not only of Colombia. If you look at this map of the Environmental Justice Atlas, a major project guided by Juan Martinez Alier that many of you probably have heard, can show you the different environmental conflicts around the world. And in many, many cases, they coincide with the most biodiverse regions. This is paradoxical that we are seeing a lot of environmental conflicts and violent conflicts with places where nature has most of its wealth still protected. And I think that's part of what I'm trying to start wrapping up with, this idea of a new social contract with nature and with each other. We need an economic model that is based on the common good. This has to go beyond markets and states. We have been paying too much attention between the pendulum between markets and states, but we need to rely more on the commons, on self-governance, and on collective action. And at the local level, we have learned a lot about collective action, a lot. But now we have a challenge, because now we have to go up to the global scale, at the planetary scale. And that is going to be critical. We have now the human cognitive tools. We evolved the cognitive tools as humans to cooperate, to be empathic with others. But there are certain challenges too regarding that. And it will require a different approach about what we usually call in economics the homo economicus. We need to shift away from that into a new entity in which humans relate with each other and not only so as individuals. And in that, I love this quote by Judith Butler very recently in an interview that has to do with peace and violence. And she's saying here that the most powerful argument against violence has been grounded in the notion that when I do violence to another human being, I also do violence to myself. And this is key in this argument, because at the end, she also says there are relational perspectives that would challenge that point of departure of the liberal individualistic tradition. and ecological perspectives as well. Because also in this argument, when I harm nature, I am harming myself in this new idea of a new entity of humans relating to with each other. In a study that we did recently that we published in Nature Sustainability, we jump from Homo economicus to what we call an unearthed human. This is a human that changes this idea that we are not that perfect, calculative, non-emotional being, but we are full of cognitive biases. We have weaknesses, impatience, problems of intertemporal choice with cognitive limits, but also we are prosocial. And in that sense, we have a better understanding today of how the actual humans work. And this human is embedded in a social cultural context, but also embedded in the biosphere. And with that argument, what I'm trying to communicate here in this idea is that the original idea that the econs, this Homo economicus man, that it's greater and larger in this yellow color and surrounded by this thin sphere of what would be context, has to shift to a next level down in which we have a richer context, both cultural, political, ecological, and thinking of this individual in yellow as a smaller entity, a more humble entity. But in the third layer down, what we're saying is this coevolution in which context transforms humans and humans transform context again. And that's how we transform nature and culture. And in that sense, this coevolution of behavior and its surrounding structures, as you can see in the figure in the right, is this idea of emergent multi-scale structures, ecological, political, economic, cultural, ecological, that interact through the interactions among humans. And that is the main point, that peace, nature, and this common good require an economy that offers peace as tranquility, not just as security, and that nature as our common home, la casa común, is a perfect vehicle for bringing this idea of peace as tranquility because of this relationship idea. And this,
sorry, Professor Cárdenas,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. If you can
Yeah.
wrap it up in one or two.
This was exactly my last quote from Laudato Si. The common good calls for social peace, the stability and security provided by a certain order which cannot be achieved without particular concern for distributive justice. Whenever this is violated, violence always ensues. Society as a whole and the state in particular are obliged to defend and promote the common good. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to Professor Cardenas for your beautiful vision of peace is tranquility. Now we'll turn it over to Elena Batani to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melinda. So I'm Elena, and as Melinda, work in the Security Task Force of the Vatican COVID Commission. And it's really a pleasure for me to introduce you to Susi Snyder, that is an expert on nuclear weapons with over 2 decades experience working at the intersection between nuclear weapons and human rights. So if Professor Cardenas showed the connection between peace, justice, and the preservation of creation, Susi will show you the connection between peace and finance. She coordinates, indeed, the project Don't Bank of the Bomb, that is a global effort by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, also known as ICAN, and PAX, a peace movement. And she is engaging the financial sector as an ally in ending the production of nuclear weapons. Susi has also contributed to a number of recent books, including A World Free from Nuclear Weapons, that contains the proceedings of the 2017 Symposium on Nuclear Disarmament organized by the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. She also contributed to Sleepwalk into Armageddon, The Threat of Nuclear Annihilation, and to the book War and Environment Reader. She also served as the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So, Susi, thank you very much again for being here today with us. I would like you, if possible, to expand on the link between nuclear and war and finance, and the opportunities we have to break this vicious connection, for example, throughout the project Don't Bank on the Bomb. Please.
Well, thank you so much, Elena, for the lovely introduction. And it's always such a great pleasure to come together with such fine and learned individuals and to talk about these issues, bringing the importance of economy, of peace, and what we can do ourselves. So I'm going to be really direct. I'm going to talk about money. All too often, we see money as a representation of an economic order that can kind of easily amplify our selfishness. It derails our spiritual growth. And of course, any kind of rampant selfishness at the expense of others is unspiritual, it's unkind, and it's in opposition to the core teachings of our faith. But the reality is, the truth of modern life is that we kind of need money. We can't live our lives or serve others without it. So how do we turn money from a problem into a solution? And I've been looking at these questions for the last several years as I coordinate Don't Bank on the Bomb. And as mentioned, this is a project that's a collaboration between PAX and the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And so we work with the financial sector to try to change how they look at nuclear weapons. And we want to encourage companies that are involved in producing nuclear bombs to shift out of that business, to change their focus, to do good. And we also have been building up the global stigma against nuclear weapons by getting the financial sector, and that I mean banks, asset managers, pension funds, to avoid investments and to say very clearly and very publicly that they will avoid investments. We publish also information about the companies involved in producing nuclear bombs, and we make that freely available because information is power. Every year, the number of investors who want to stay away from harmful industries increases. People don't want to be associated with producing things that are designed to harm or to kill. And whether it's tobacco or climate change, we are effectively using the power of our pocket to shape the world that we want. And it's tricky because global challenges can feel insurmountable. But I want to reassure you, we can find ways to live our values, and we can make our money or the money of our institutions, our organizations, work for good. So, there are these two main existential threats that we face. There's catastrophic climate change and nuclear weapons. And I will focus on nuclear weapons. And I just want to remind folks, there's about 13,000 of these nuclear weapons on the planet. And the whole point of them is to destroy cities. That's what they are designed for. They are tools of mass murder. And they cannot ever be used without killing innocent people or without leaving a contaminating legacy for generations to come. Nuclear weapons are a manifestation of an economy that rewards war instead of peace. And they are a symbol of extreme violence against people, against the environment, and against the future. But good news. On the 22nd of January, 2021, so just a couple of months from now, nuclear weapons will become illegal under international law, because that's the day that the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons goes into effect. And it's really important, this prohibition, because most people do not support nuclear weapons. They object to the very concept of indiscriminate harm. People don't want war, they want peace, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know what they can do with these large existential geopolitical problems. So I want to talk about what is already at our fingertips, that what we can do to change the conversation and to help contribute to the end of nuclear weapons. It's good to remember that wars and the preparation for war fighting, sometimes they make a few people really rich. And when that lines the pockets of some, those people will line up to make sure that that war never ends, that these products never go away. And we're seeing that happen. I mean, right now, global military spending is almost unthinkable. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute points to last year, 2019, global military spending at almost $2 trillion. And I do work with a lot of numbers, but $2 trillion to me is unfathomable. So I needed to break it down and put it in perspective. And when you look at it, that's about $250 for every person on the planet. On a planet where many live on less than $2 a day. And it's unconscionable. And I mean, just last night, Boris Johnson in the UK announced the UK will increase its defense spending to a level not seen since the Cold War. And he can say that because he does not worry about losing his job due to the pandemic. He got the best treatment in the world when he got ill. And he's not worried about where his next meal comes from. This is a lot of money. And it's up to us to reshift this priority. So that's military spending overall. But when it comes to nuclear weapons, it's still a lot of money. It's 9 countries. And last year they spent almost $73 billion on their nuclear arsenal. Again, $73 billion is hard to figure out. But what it turns out to is about $2,000 every second. $2,000 a second on weapons that have been rejected by most countries in the world and will become illegal in January. But these are the figures spent by governments. And in some countries, a small half of them, it's all government work to make the nuclear bombs. But the biggest arsenals involve private industry, private contractors. And there's a lot of this money that goes into the private sector. So of course, within ICANN and with our campaign work, we work to change government policy. That's really important, to get them to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But at the same time, we work to create an environment that makes it easier for them to join that treaty, to make it easier to end nuclear weapons completely. And that's where the role of the financial sector comes in. Because realistically, nuclear weapons, they're seen by most people as symbols of power. They're symbols that can cause terrifying and uncontrollable destruction. And because of how terrible and terrifying the problem is, it's sometimes easy just to think of them as symbols, as this symbolic monument to war. Even when all evidence shows what they are, they're weapons of suicide, genocide, ecocide. And there's no way to use them without destroying everything we treasure. Thanks to good study by archaeologists, we know that cultural symbols, people will spend a lot of time and energy to maintain cultural symbols, even in the face of great challenges, even when they know those symbols could hurt them. And they sink a lot of time and effort into this, and it can be hard to let go. It's a commitment to sunk costs or past investments, and that can be dangerous. It's been blamed for the fragmentation of lots of civilizations, from the Mesopotamian to the Mayan to the end of the French monarchy. But environmental and cultural shifts are inevitable. And for society to thrive, it must change and adapt. When weapons are prohibited, history shows that society, including the private economic part of it, does adapt. Let me give you an example. Citing pressure from financial institutions, producers of cluster munitions stopped production. Textron, Lockheed Martin, Orbital ATK, these are massive, massive weapons producers. All US companies. The US did not join the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and they all stopped making cluster bombs. But they didn't do that because the US suggested it. In fact, when they were asked by the Trump administration to start again, they said no. And they said pressure from activists, states, and NGOs leads to divestment from companies with revenue tied to cluster munition production and deployment. So they clearly said and noted that the pressure from the financial sector was a reason to stop making these weapons. So how do we make it work with nuclear weapons? I want to tell you, it's already starting. See, the ban treaty makes it illegal to assist, encourage, or induce anyone to manufacture or develop nuclear weapons. And after it was adopted, that's what a lot of financial institutions started to do. Amalgamated Bank in the US, ABP, which is the Dutch civil servants pension fund and one of the largest pension funds in the world, they divested, and all of them directly cited the ban treaty. And we know that this happens because of civil pressure. It's been shown that it's a small group of people who change these policies. And it's a tool that we have to change the policies of the financial institutions that invest and then set the stage for governments to change their policies as well. And I'm asking you for help today to help end the threat of nuclear weapons, to contact your bank or your pension fund or your institution to make sure they are not associated with companies involved in producing nuclear weapons. It is time to invest in what we know brings this sustainable peace, what brings peace as tranquility, education, health, women, the environment, and protecting and restoring nature. Engaging the financial sector and using the power of our wallets changes behavior. And every company we buy from, every investment we or our institutions make represents a choice. So to build sustainable peace, we can't invest in companies who perpetuate war, but instead choose those who represent a future in which we live in harmony with the earth and all those upon it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie, for your very concrete encouragement. I'm going to go call my bank after this webinar, so thank you. Now over to Marco Emanuele for our final speaker.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Marco Emanuele, and I'm another coordinator of this amazing village. Well, following our last speeches, it is now evident that our contemporary economic system generates difference, inequality, and conflict. So far, it is common knowledge that shared interests, especially economic ones, could build the idea of peace. But our next speaker, Professor Raul Caruso, will show us that the opposite is actually true. Only if there is a true fraternity among people, that fraternity that the Pope is referring to in his last encyclical, then the economy will effectively grow on solid and sound foundations. So let me gladly introduce him. Raul Caruso today is professor of peace economics at the Catholic University Milan, the only chair addressing this theme in the world. It needs to be spread, obviously. He has a great international experience. He led the network of European peace scientists for 10 years. And one of his main activity today is the direction of the European Center of Peace Science, Integration and Cooperation in Albania. He was asked directly from the Pope to be in charge of this international center. So, Raul, we have a question for you asked by Michel Guedum Benbenguia from Congo. Here it is. Hello, the eastern part of my country is subject to many army conflicts, and I believe that a good and inclusive economic system can set down these conflicts. In light of economy of Francesco, what are the tools and assets we can put in practice in order to silence conflicts and promote a society based on peace through inclusive business? Well, Raul, I give you the floor, and goodbye, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thanks for your nice introduction. I'm happy to be here, and I'm trying a comprehensive picture, a comprehensive plot of how peace economic appears to me. And so I skipped for a while your question, or the question of the this person from Congo. I'll put my answer within my speech. How Juan Camilo said before, peace is a common good. Is a global common good. Of course, we can have different channels of interpretation about the relation between economics and peace. I will start with I would highlight some points which, in my perspective, have some practical consequences. I would start with the arm industry, even because it's connected with what Susi has said before. The arm industry nowadays is the crucial issue when we speak about peace. Why? Because the arms industry is now characterized, much more than years ago, is characterized by reaction to private incentives. What do I mean? I mean that since many large arm producers in the world, in both US and European countries, are listed in stock exchanges, managers of these companies may react to incentives that take shape into financial markets. In particular, when a company is listed in the stock exchange and if shareholders approve some stock-based compensation for managers, so basically what's going to happen is that managers are likely have the incentive to increase the profit in the very short run. So in the arms industry, this implies that they are committed to increase selling of weapons worldwide in the very short run. Of course, this is not a good news for peace. So in this respect, this is connected with what Susi has said before, the financial pressure on companies. This is another example of this. So the first thing I think we should think about, we should suggest to policymakers is basically that of the listing arm producer from stock exchanges. In the village of Business and Peace, we have shared this idea. Of course, this is something is a dream to some extent, but perhaps it could be easier when we consider that same arm producer in Europe are state-owned. Maybe it's more difficult in US, but in any case, it's time perhaps to open a public debate to stimulate the public discourse to have a reflection on this. Okay, this is the first point. The second point is about the arms market worldwide. We know that the Arms Trade Treaty approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations has been went into effect a few years ago, but unfortunately the major powers, US, China, and Russia, has not ratified this treaty. But the point is that we need some regulation for arms export, because the arms market worldwide at the moment appears to be really unregulated. And of course, this is a crucial issue for European countries in particular, because in European countries, many state-owned arm producers are which are also listed in the stock exchange, should be under the control of the state. But if the state is the shareholder of these firms, it is unlikely that the state is going to control itself. So this is a very crucial and political issue for European countries, because the only solution we have for this is to create an international agency, EU-based, like the European Central Bank, for example. Imagine a European Central Bank independent, working to limit weapons trade, arm export of European countries towards developing countries. This would be a great advancement to favor to work for peace, for example. So, in brief, the point is that we need to regulate the arms market worldwide. Maybe we can start from Europe. Okay. Of course, there are also some. I'm pleased to connect with Susi speech about behavior of consumer, about critical consumption. When she said, contact your bank, ask if you are connected with nuclear weapons. Call your bank, ask if they are connected with any kind of weapon, I would say. In Italy, we had a campaign some years ago about that. So it was called Campagna Banche Armate, and the people reacted to this in the sense that not only investors but also consumer refuse to have a current account in this in banks connected with the arms producing and arms trade. So it's time perhaps to start again a global campaign about this. Okay, we have now evidence that in particular for sustainability issues and environmental issues, consumers worldwide react to this. It's time to use the power of wallets, as Susi said, even in particular for war-related issues, in particular for weapons. There is another point about arms industry that I'm really concerned of, everybody's concerned of, is the technological determinism associated with that. What does it mean? It means that many people believe that the technological improvement are the key forces to advance society. But, and this is why I call this determinism, not me. I mean, the statement, the expression is famous among scholars. The point is that this is really dangerous when we consider weapons. So consider robotics, digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and consider what people said about drones or about self-regulated weapons. Imagine a science fiction movie and imagine that there are some people now working to make a science fiction movie real with a main weapons choosing targets, like yes, like Terminator the movie. So this is of course unacceptable for us, in particular because a huge amount of resources have been allocated to research to improve this. In this respect, I also would like to mention how Pope Francis in Laudato Si made a very clear-cut statement about this. He, in the Laudato Si, wrote explicitly that any kind of research in military is a nonsense, and we cannot accept accept this anymore. Consider now that now we are experiencing a pandemic, and now it's much more clear for everybody in the world that years ago it would have been much better to allocate billions of dollars, billions of euros to research in health and not to weapons. So I'm running out of time. The last point is about the macro issues. So that also has been a point of other villages in this economy of Francesco, is related to the nature of firms to reply to the questions. The point is how to create an inclusive economy. So the first thing we have to do, we have to push governments to allow hybrid firms in the market. By hybrid, firms, firms which associate the scope of profits with the goal of creating or producing a common goods, a benefit, basically for everybody. We have the example of benefit companies in Italy, but also in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, and 2 days ago has been approved the law in Uruguay. So the idea is that firms can be actors of societal development. They can be actors, active actors in producing common goods, and in particular in producing well-being over a long-term period. Because the point is that now we are in the middle of the great shock. We are in a pandemic. So now everybody's calling the state. Now we know that the state has to be the main actor in fixing the problem of pandemics. But this is in the short run. This is a shock. But in the very long run, everybody in society has to play a role, and firms have to play a role as well. In this respect, firms, companies which are able to combine profit seeking with social values could be the key. To finish, because I'm out of time, nothing can be done without education. I'm happy to say that I teach economics, peace economics in my university in Milan, because perhaps it's time to suggest any university in the world to have courses on peace economics, because peace is not, like Pope Francis said, and Fratelli Tutti, mustn't be a spillover of economics, but must be the objective of the economics. So I stop here because I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Caruso for your holistic analysis of the relation between peace and economics. Very much appreciated. And thank you again to all of our speakers. Apologize, we've gone a little bit over time, but it's been a very inspiring event. And now we can understand more how to reckon with these incredibly large systems that order our world. And it's not only these experts who have the power to affect change, it's all of us who are participating in the economy of Francesco as well, who are creating new proposals to renew the economy. So thank you very much again to everyone who has tuned in, and to all of the presenters and speakers. We hope that everyone has benefited from all of the wisdom shared here today, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the week. So have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you very much.